RedLANO, Red Latinoamericana de Neuro-Oncología.
La pregunta para David es con respecto a la resolución de la fluorescencia, en el sentido de que mostró imágenes en las cuales a simple ojo se podía observar la fluorescencia y en los cuales, utilizando el probe, podía ver que había más tumor más profundo. Lógicamente pensamos que debe haber, a pesar de que el tumor está más profundo, que debe haber una conexión entre ese tumor que se veía a simple ojo con la fluorescencia y ese tumor que se veía con el probe. ¿Y cuál es la resolución de poder determinar que realmente no, ese tejido que comunica el que no se veía a simple ojo, con el tejido que se identifica con el probe, que realmente no es tejido tumoral? Y que posiblemente el patólogo todavía no está viendo los cambios dentro de la célula que le permiten identificarlo como una célula tumoral.
Well, there are certainly limitations, and we don't know the answers to all of these yet. But I would point out that the visual fluorescence is very imprecise, or it has errors. That there may be tissue that doesn't fluoresce that has very high levels of protoporphyrin IX, that because of the optical properties of absorption and scattering, you can't perceive fluorescence, that our eyes are not as objective as a camera system can be. So that's point number one. The second is that there's no illusion that any of these technologies today can cure a high-grade glioma. But we know that patients who have radical resections do better and enable other treatment modalities to work in synergy. And if our goal is to accomplish this maximal resection, we know that by all the studies that we've done to date, that the degree of tumor, the boundary, the gradient, the topographical map, if you will, follows these optical parameters, and the surgeon with these tools can execute a resection that is more precise than he or she can without the aid of that technology. Just as when the operating microscope first became available 30, 40 years ago, surgeons said, I don't need that, I operate with my eye, and they did a remarkable job, but nobody would argue today that the operating microscope hasn't been helpful. And when image guidance became available, there were older surgeons who said, I don't need image guidance, I know my anatomy, and look at it, how good I do. And they did a remarkable job. They were extremely talented, but the technology enables people to stand on those shoulders and be a little bit better. And I think the fluorescence, the optical imaging, and again, I think this is just the beginning. The optical imaging that can be integrated into the operating microscope and let us accomplish a resection that we sought to at the beginning of surgery is just made easier for us. It becomes a standard, it becomes an expectation, and incrementally we do better.
Quisiera preguntar, para el caso específico del ala, la fluorescencia se debe a una propiedad de las células tumorales o de la vasculatura, y si esto en los modelos experimentales se afecta por el uso de antiangiogénico.
Yes, there are multiple factors that the answer is not fully known. There are several things that are known. It is known that a higher degree of vascularity, the capillary density, will correlate with the degree of fluorescence. It is known that the degree of blood-brain barrier breakdown will correlate with increased enhancement. But if you control for both of those factors, tumor cells will fluoresce more than normal cells. And at a molecular level, we know that there's upregulation of certain pathways to process, particularly within the mitochondria, to process 5-ALA to protoporphyrin IX is enhanced, it's upregulated. So all of these factors are at play. We don't understand yet how strong each factor is contributing.
Yo tengo una pregunta, I have a question. El hecho de poder tener una mayor resección con esta técnica, en su experiencia ha implicado que puede haber mayor déficit postoperatorio no esperado.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. There are 2 points. One is that in a post hoc analysis of the German institutional study that's been published, Stummer and colleagues have shown that their patients had a higher incidence of neurologic deficit under fluorescent conditions, exactly what you described. But that if you follow, that was immediate post-op, but over time, that the other group got worse and the fluorescent group got better, and the paths cross, the lines cross, and that when you get out 3 months and 6 months, the fluorescent group was neurologically better. One of the risks, the second point I would make in answer to that, though, all of these technologies that have let us do more aggressive but also more accurate resections have changed the goal of our surgery, have changed, I think, the strategy, surgical strategy in malignant glioma. That you could, using this fluorescence, do the patient a disservice by resecting, if you restricted your resection just to the contrast enhancement. Because we know with the high-grade gliomas that the infiltrating margin here is the source of the tumor recurrence. And if you look at the experience coming from Montpellier, France, with Hugh Defoe, he's now arguing a supra resection, where his limit is not based on the tumor characteristics on the preoperative MRI. His limit is when he bumps into functional tissue doing intraoperative mapping. So he's doing very radical resections that make ours look very small. And to the extent that the fluorescence guidance keeps us following, if our goal is to follow the contrast enhancing rims, then we're seeing fewer mistakes, fewer errors coming because of loss of co-registration of an image guidance system. But our resections may be small. We did a study with our high-grade gliomas under fluorescent condition, where we measured the goodness of our resection not by how much contrast enhancement was present on the postoperative scan, but how much additional tissue beyond the contrast enhancement we took when that was not our goal. It's very similar to in radiosurgery with the conformality index, where you're trying to keep everything tight around the tumor. And our fluorescence group, our resection volumes post-op are smaller than our white light resections. Because on a white light resection, you're not quite confident where that enhancing boundary may be based on image guidance. Whereas with the fluorescence guidance, we're resecting right along the contrast enhancing portion of the tumor. That's a long answer, but I think it's a complex question.
Una pregunta primero, ¿se necesita una curva de aprendizaje? ¿El tiempo quirúrgico se duplica o es mayor? Y tercero, la facilidad de adicionar a los microscopios que tenemos esta tecnología para mejorar los límites de resección.
Okay. All right. First, with respect to the learning curve, there's a learning curve, but it's very short. There's a learning curve to recognize the fluorescence and to not be fooled by what we call autofluorescence, or the background glow. I know of at least one case that was done by someone using this for the very first time who resected way beyond the tumor because they just didn't know what the fluorescence was. The fluorescence is very robust, but it helps, you need to see it a few times. Gleolan that's distributed from Germany, the fluorophore now available, requires one to go someplace to see a case before they'll supply the glial end. The learning curve, the other thing with the learning curve is you only see fluorescence where you can see the tissue surface. So overhanging tissue, if you're in a resection cavity, the wall is harder to see. And you learn using this to pay attention to the sides or to the overhanging tissue. You have to be careful with that. And similarly, you have to be careful that there's not, in a multiform tumor, there may be fluorescent tissue, non-fluorescent tissue, fluorescent tissue, like French pastry. And you have to use image guidance too to know that you're not leaving a big deep nodule of tumor. So yes, there's a learning curve, but it's actually, this is very easy to use. Of all the technologies that everyone has spoken about today, this is the easiest to use. To the microscope, to the usual microscope. All right, so the adaptation, your second question was?
If we can use our own older microscopes.
Yeah, all right, that was the third.
No, it was this two.
Oh, okay.
Cost and how is prolonged the...
Yeah, the time. The time is actually shorter using fluorescence guidance. And the reason is that the visible guidance is so intuitive and so easy that you can resect right along and you don't have to go back and wonder, have I gone far enough there? It makes it easier. It's especially helpful when you're against eloquent tissue. If you're coming up against cortical spinal tract, or you're coming up against the parts of the insula where, on an insular tumor, where you say, I don't know, it's extremely, it's quicker, and it's easier on the surgeon. The worry that you have as a surgeon, every part of the resection is eliminated because you have right in front of you what's tumor or not. So the only requirement is you have to give 5-ALA to the patient. It's taken orally about 3 hours before the surgery. So when our patients come into the hospital that morning, the first thing they do is they get the 5-ALA. And then we will do the MRI scan that will be used for their image guidance. Then they come up to the operating room, and by the time they're positioned and prepped, it will be 2 to 3 hours. Nobody knows what the optimal time of fluorescence is after they drink it, but it's very long. That in instances where you're operating 2 hours after they've ingested the 5-ALA, the tumors fluoresce. And in cases that might go 6, 7, 8 hours, it's still very fluorescent at that time point. But once you're started, there's no setup time. They drink the fluid. That's the only thing you have to do. Everything else is identical to how you would operate. With respect to modification of equipment, there is a module that has to be added to the operating microscope. And Zeiss makes an adaptation that can be incorporated into a Pentero microscope. And Leica has an adaptation that can be added to their microscope. I think Muller either now has or is about to release a module for their operating microscope. And we had a research microscope when we started our project, and we upgraded one of our other Pentero microscopes about 3 years ago. And it was the same microscope, but now it's been adapted for fluorescence. I don't know how these are being priced, and the cost of this will be different in every country. In the United States, these modules, I've heard figures given around $40,000, $50,000.
Nosotros en el hospital nuevo que tenemos compramos un Pentero y le compramos el software para hacer esto. Nosotros tratamos de ponérselo al otro microscopio que teníamos y no funciona. O sea, si es un Pentero, sí, no importa si es una versión, cuál sea la versión. Pero yo tenía una pregunta técnica, y es que usted dijo 2 horitas, 3 horitas antes la cirugía, ¿cierto? Pero uno revisa la literatura y hay gran diversidad de tiempo. Algunos dicen que 6 horas, que 8 horas, y cuando uno se demora tanto en el montaje, mientras hace la imagen, llega a cirugía, dicen que el pico es como 4 horas, entonces no hemos podido saber cuántas horas es que hay que calcular realmente, en términos prácticos, pues.
Yeah, we have not noted any difference to visual between 2 hours and 8 hours. There was some animal work that was done in Germany 10 years ago that suggested a peak around 3 hours. And that's why in the German study they used 3 hours. But that peak is very broad.
Otra pregunta, ¿qué pasa si uno usa una luz común y corriente, una luz negra? ¿Por qué es eso? La luz negra que se consigue en cualquier ferretería y la pone uno en el campo quirúrgico. What happens if you use an ordinary black light?
We haven't tried that.
Same way with wavy.
Yeah, if you can buy a light source at around 400 to put your own light source in, and then it will fluoresce. The adaptation that the microscope companies have made has one additional feature, though. They change the filters through which you see it come back to make the fluorescence more visible to you. That being said, if you put a blue light source and you look from the side, a high-grade glioma fluoresces very brightly. You would see it.
Okay,
Yes. So the question is, what about repeat second surgery? Can you still do this? And we've done this on a considerable number now, and it works very well. The European experience with second surgeries was that it was identical. There's one trap with second surgeries, is that fluorescence will be present where there's gliosis. So that a patient who's been previously treated and has received external beam radiation, we believe there's some enhanced fluorescence, and that could be the source of seminarium.
bueno, nos toca terminar, que ya nos toca irnos. Si tienen preguntas, pues ellos van a estar por ahí para que se las hagan personalmente. Me da pena cortarlos así, pero ya me están haciendo ojos. Gracias por la tarde tan interesante. Muchas gracias.
RedLANO, Red Latinoamericana de Neuro-Oncología.